The crash that changed everything. The morning sun cast long shadows across Jake Morrison's auto repair shop when the sky suddenly erupted in fire and thunder. What looked like a meteor streaked overhead, trailing smoke and strange purple flames, before crashing into the cornfield behind his garage with a sound that rattled every window in town. Jake wiped his oil-stained hands on his coveralls and stepped outside, squinting at the pillar of smoke rising from the field. At 32, he'd seen plenty of strange things in his small Iowa town, but nothing quite like this. His curiosity getting the better of him, he grabbed his toolbox and headed toward the crash site. The object wasn't a meteor at all. Half buried in the earth was a sleek, crystalline vessel the size of a small building, its surface shimmering with colors that seemed to shift and dance. Strange symbols pulsed along its hull, and despite the crash, it looked remarkably intact. "Well, I'll be damned," Jake muttered, circling the ship. He'd worked on everything from tractors to motorcycles, but this was definitely outside his wheelhouse. Section of the hull suddenly hissed and slid open like liquid metal. Jake instinctively stepped back as tall, graceful figures emerged from the ship. They stood nearly 7 feet tall, with elongated limbs and skin that seemed to shimmer with an inner light. Their faces were angular and elegant, with large eyes that held an unmistakable intelligence. The leader of the group, distinguished by intricate markings on his forehead and a bearing that spoke of command, surveyed the damage to his vessel before his gaze fell on Jake. When he spoke, his voice was melodious but carried clear disdain. "Primitive human," Commander Nexus said, his words somehow understood despite being in an alien tongue. "Your crude planet has damaged our vessel. We require no assistance from your kind." Jake raised his hands peacefully. "Look, friend, I don't know who you are or where you're from, but if you need help fixing whatever that thing is, I'm probably your best bet for 50 miles in any direction." The aliens exchanged glances, and several made sounds that Jake realized were laughter. Technician Quilex, younger than the others and clearly junior in rank, stepped forward with what appeared to be a complex scanning device. "Commander, perhaps we should focus on repairs rather than—" "Silence," Nexus cut him off sharply. "We need no help from beings who still use combustion engines and metal tools. Our technology is millennia beyond anything this world has produced." The pride before the fallover. The next hour, Jake watched as the Xanthari crew worked with instruments that seemed like magic. Holographic displays materialized in the air, showing complex schematics of their ship's systems. Energy beams swept over the damaged sections, and crystalline repair drones buzzed around the hull like mechanical insects. Despite their obvious technological superiority, something was wrong. Jake could hear it in the ship's systems, a subtle irregularity in the humming, a slight vibration that shouldn't be there. His years of working with engines had given him an almost supernatural ability to diagnose problems by sound and feel alone. "The hyperdrive matrix shows optimal function," reported Engineer Vexus, an older Xanthari with elaborate neural implants. "Structural integrity at 97%. All systems appear normal." Commander Nexus nodded with satisfaction. "Excellent. Begin startup sequence." The ship's systems whined to life, building to what should have been a smooth, powerful hum. Instead, the sound grew increasingly irregular before cutting out entirely with a sound like breaking glass. "What happened?" Nexus demanded. "Unknown. Commander, all diagnostics show green. There should be no malfunction." They tried again. And again. Each attempt ended the same way. Promising start, building power, then sudden failure. The Xanthari grew increasingly frustrated, their elegant composure beginning to crack. Jake cleared his throat. "Mind if I take a look?" The aliens turned, to stare at him as if he'd suggested performing surgery with a butter knife. "You?" Vexus scoffed. "Human, our diagnostic equipment can detect flaws at the molecular level. If our instruments cannot locate the problem, your primitive senses certainly cannot." "Maybe that's the problem," Jake said quietly. "Sometimes when you're looking too hard at the details, you miss the big picture." The human touch commander Nexus was about to dismiss Jake when Quilex spoke up. "Commander, we've been trying for 2 hours. Perhaps we could allow the human to examine the systems? What harm could it do?" Nexus's jaw tightened, but after another failed startup attempt, his pride began to waver. "Very well. 5 minutes, human. Then we continue with proper methods. Jake approached the ship's exposed engine compartment, ignoring the complex holographic displays and scanning devices. Instead, he placed his hands directly on the ship's hull, feeling the vibrations running through the metal. He closed his eyes, listening to the subtle sounds of the machinery. "Your problem's not in the hyperdrive," he said after a moment. "It's in the power coupling 3 sections back. There's a harmonic resonance that's throwing everything off balance." The Xanthari stared at him. "Impossible," Vexus declared. "Our scans show perfect alignment in all power systems." Jake opened his toolbox and pulled out a simple wrench. Sometimes the old ways work best. He crawled into the ship's maintenance tunnel, following the vibrations he could feel in the hull. The Xanthari technology was beautiful, crystalline conduits carrying energy in patterns that resembled flowing water more than electricity. But there, hidden behind a decorative panel, he found what he was looking for. "Here's your problem," he called out. "One of your power couplers got knocked loose in the crash. It's still making contact, so your computers think it's fine, but it's vibrating just enough to destabilize the entire power grid." "That's impossible," Nexus said, but he was already moving to see what Jake had found. "Our coupling systems are magnetically sealed. They cannot come loose." Jake pointed to a hairline, crack in one of the coupling mounts. "Looks like the impact found a stress point your designers didn't expect. Sometimes the simplest problems cause the biggest failures." With careful precision, Jake used his wrench to realign the coupling and tighten the mount. The change was immediate. The irregular vibration stopped and the ship's system settled into a smooth, healthy rhythm. "Now try your startup," Jake said, crawling back out of the tunnel. The Xanthari exchanged uncertain glances. Commander Nexus activated the ship's systems once more. This time, the hyperdrive built to full power with a perfect, crystalline tone. That seemed to make the air itself sing. The shift in perspective. The silence that followed was profound. The Xanthari stared at their displays, showing perfect system function, then at Jake, who was casually wiping grease from his hands with an old rag. "How?" Quilex whispered. "How did you detect what our instruments could not?" Jake shrugged. "Different kind of sensing, I guess. Your computers are amazing, but they can only tell you what they're programmed to look for. Sometimes you need human intuition to catch the things that fall between the cracks." Commander Nexus approached Jake slowly, his expression unreadable. "You fixed our ship with a primitive tool in minutes, after our advanced diagnostics failed for hours." "Sometimes the right tool is the simple one," Jake replied. "Doesn't matter how fancy your equipment is if it can't tell you what's really wrong." The Xanthari leader was quiet for a long moment, studying Jake with new eyes. "We may have underestimated your kind." "Most folks do," Jake said with a grin. "But that's okay. We're used to proving ourselves the hard way." As the sun began to set over the Iowa cornfield, something fundamental had shifted. The Xanthari, who had arrived with certainty in their technological superiority, now looked at the human mechanic with something approaching respect. And Jake, who had started his day expecting nothing more than fixing Mrs. Henderson's pickup truck, had just repaired an interstellar spacecraft with a $20 wrench. The real journey, however, was just beginning. As the ship's systems hummed with perfect harmony, Commander Nexus realized that perhaps there was more to these humans than met the eye. And perhaps the universe was far more complicated than even their advanced civilization understood. The invitation inside. The next morning brought unexpected visitors to Jake's garage. Commander Nexus and his crew had spent the night running diagnostics on their repaired ship, and what they discovered left them deeply unsettled. Not only was Jake's repair perfect, but somehow his crude fix had actually improved their engine efficiency by 12%. "Human Jake Morrison," Nexus announced as he entered the shop, his tone markedly different from the previous day's condescension. "We request your presence aboard our vessel." Jake looked up from the carburetor he was rebuilding, motor oil still dripping from his fingers. "Something wrong with the repair?" "On the contrary," said Engineer Vexus, stepping forward with obvious reluctance. "Your modification has enhanced our propulsion system beyond its original specifications. We need to understand how. Quilex bounced slightly on his feet, his youthful enthusiasm barely contained. Please come see, Jake Morrison. Our ship has systems you've never imagined. Jake wiped his hands clean and followed them to the crystalline vessel. Up close, the ship was even more impressive than he'd realized. The hull seemed to be grown rather than built, with organic curves that flowed like frozen water. As they approached, sections of the wall simply dissolved, revealing an interior that took Jake's breath away. The ship's corridors were vast and airy, with walls that glowed with soft, natural light. Everything seemed alive somehow, pulsing gently, like a heartbeat. Jake ran his fingers along the walls as they walked, feeling the subtle vibrations of the ship's systems. "Your ship is alive, isn't it?" he asked suddenly. The Xanthari stopped walking and stared at him. "How could you know that?" Vexus demanded. "That information is not visually apparent to untrained eyes." Jake shrugged. "You can feel it in the walls, like a pulse. It's not mechanical, it's biological. Our vessels are biomechanical hybrids," Quilex explained eagerly, ignoring Vexus's sharp look. "Living crystal matrices bonded with technological components. They grow and adapt over centuries." "That's incredible," Jake breathed. "No wonder your diagnostics missed the problem yesterday. You weren't just dealing with a machine. You were dealing with a living thing that was hurt." The communication bridge. They entered what appeared to be the ship's command center, a circular room dominated by a shimmering pool of liquid light. Holographic displays floated in the air like soap bubbles, showing star charts and data streams that moved with mesmerizing beauty. "This is our communications nexus," Nexus explained. "From here, we can speak with our homeworld across vast distances." Jake approached the central console cautiously. Like everything else on the ship, it seemed to respond to his presence, glowing brighter as he drew near. "May I?" Before anyone could object, Jake placed his hands on the console's surface. The reaction was immediate and startling. The entire room filled with harmonious tones, and the displays began showing new patterns Jake had never seen before. "Extraordinary," whispered Communications Officer Thylix, a slender Xanthari with intricate tattoos covering her arms. "The ship is responding to him as if he were one of us." "That should be impossible," Vexus protested. "The bio-neural interface requires decades of training to master." Jake felt something strange happening. The ship wasn't just responding to his touch, it was communicating with him. Images flashed through his mind, vast star fields, alien worlds, and the long journey that had brought the Xanthari to Earth. He saw their homeworld, a place of incredible beauty where crystal cities grew from living mountains. "You're explorers," he said softly. "You've been traveling for centuries, looking for new forms of life?" Thylix gasped. He's reading the ship's memory core directly. "Even trained Xanthari technicians require interface equipment to do that." "How is this possible?" Nexus demanded, but his voice held wonder rather than anger. Jake stepped back from the console, shaking his head to clear it. "I don't know. It just made sense. Like reading the emotions of an old friend." The second crisis, their conversation was interrupted by an urgent chime from the ship's systems. Vexus rushed to a diagnostic station, his expression growing increasingly concerned. "Commander, we have multiple system failures throughout the ship. Life support, navigation, even structural integrity are showing degraded function." "How is that
Possible?" Nexus snapped. "All systems were optimal this morning."
Jake listened to the ship's changing harmonics, frowning. "It's not failing, it's sick. Something's spreading through the bio-neural network." "Sick?" Quilex repeated. "Ships don't get sick. Living things do," Jake replied. He moved to another console, letting his instincts guide him. "When I fixed your power coupling yesterday, I think I introduced something new to the ship's system. It's trying to adapt, but the change is happening too fast." Vexus pulled up a holographic display showing the ship's bio-neural pathways. Red warning indicators were spreading like an infection through the network. "If this continues, we'll lose all ship functions within hours." "Can your medical systems help?" Jake asked. "Our ships don't have medical systems," Thylix explained. "When they're damaged, we replace components. We've never encountered a situation like this. Jake studied the spreading malfunction, his mechanical intuition working overtime. It's like an autoimmune response. The ship's biological systems are rejecting the efficiency improvements I made yesterday. Then we must remove your modifications, Vexus declared. No, wait, Jake said, holding up a hand. Removing them now would be like performing surgery on a patient in shock. We need to ease the transition, help the ship adapt gradually. The healing touch, what followed, was unlike anything the Xanthari had ever witnessed. Jake didn't use their diagnostic equipment or rely on their computer systems. Instead, he moved through the ship with his hands pressed against the walls, feeling the flow of bioneural energy like a doctor taking a pulse. Here, he said, stopping at what appeared to be a blank section of corridor. There's a blockage in the neural pathway. The ship is trying to route around it, but it's causing stress in other systems. He pulled out his multi-tool, a simple device that looked primitive compared to Xanthari technology, and carefully removed a decorative panel. Behind it lay a cluster of crystal fibers that pulsed with sickly, irregular light. These fibers are inflamed, Jake diagnosed. Like swollen nerves, they need time to adjust to the new energy patterns. Gently, almost tenderly, Jake began working with the crystal fibers. He didn't cut or replace them. Instead, he carefully massaged them, encouraging the flow of bioneural energy while relieving the pressure points that were causing distress. What are you doing? Quilex asked in fascination. Physical therapy, I guess, Jake replied. Sometimes when you hurt your back, you don't need surgery. You just need someone to work out the kinks. The results were immediate. The sickly pulsing of the crystal fibers gradually settled into a healthier rhythm, and the red warning indicators on the ship's displays began turning green. Remarkable, Thylix breathed. He's treating the ship like a living patient rather than a machine. Jake continued his work throughout the ship, finding and treating dozens of similar stress points. With each successful intervention, the Xanthari crew watched in growing amazement. Their most advanced medical technicians couldn't have diagnosed these problems, let alone treated them with such intuitive skill. The growing bond. As Jake worked, Quilex stayed close by, asking endless questions about human diagnostic techniques. The young Xanthari's enthusiasm was infectious, and Jake found himself enjoying the role of teacher. The key is listening, Jake explained as he worked on a particularly stubborn neural cluster. Every living thing has a rhythm, a natural frequency. When something's wrong, that rhythm changes. You just have to know how to hear it. But our instruments can detect frequency variations with incredible precision, Quilex protested. Sure, they can measure the frequencies, Jake agreed. But can they understand what those frequencies mean? Can they feel the difference between pain and growth, between damage and adaptation? Quilex was quiet for a moment, processing this concept. No, he admitted. Our instruments report data, but they do not interpret emotion or intent. That's the difference between fixing a machine and healing a living thing, Jake said. Machines follow rules. Living things have needs, desires, fears. Sometimes what looks like a malfunction is actually a cry for help. Commander Nexus, who had been silently observing Jake's work, stepped forward. You speak of our ship as if it has consciousness, doesn't it? Jake asked, straightening up from his work. I can feel its personality. Curious, proud, maybe a little lonely. It's been traveling through space for years, carrying you all like precious cargo. That's got to leave an impression on any thinking being. The Xanthari exchanged meaningful glances. Their ships were indeed conscious, but it was rare for anyone outside their species to recognize this fact, let alone connect with their vessels so intuitively. Jake Morrison, Nexus said formally. You have not only repaired our ship, but healed it. In our culture, such an act creates a bond of obligation and respect. I was just helping out, Jake replied modestly. Any decent mechanic would have done the same. No, Thylix said softly. Any decent mechanic would have replaced parts and called it fixed. You understood that our ship needed healing, not just repair. That level of empathy is rare. As the day wore on, and Jake completed his work throughout the ship, something fundamental changed in the relationship between human and alien. The Zenthari no longer saw Jake as a primitive being who had stumbled onto a lucky solution. They began to recognize him as a healer, someone whose intuitive understanding of living systems surpassed even their advanced technology. And Jake, for his part, began to see the Zenthari not as superior beings from the stars, but as fellow travelers, facing the same basic challenges of keeping their lives running smoothly. The tools might be different, but the need for understanding, empathy, and skilled hands remained the same across species. As the ship's bio-neural networks settled into their new improved patterns, the harmony between human and alien deepened. But their greatest test was still to come, and when it arrived, it would challenge everything both species thought they knew about intelligence, technology, and the meaning of true advancement. The fleet arrives. 3 days after Jake had healed, the Zenthari ship, the morning sky over Iowa erupted with impossible geometry. Massive vessels materialized from hyperspace, their crystalline hulls casting rainbow shadows across the cornfields. The rescue fleet had arrived, and they were not pleased. Admiral Korath's flagship Infinite Majesty dwarfed Commander Nexus's exploration vessel like a cathedral next to a cottage. When the Admiral's shuttle descended to the crash site, Jake could feel the disapproval radiating from the newcomers before they even spoke. "Commander Nexus!" Admiral Korath's voice boomed across the field, his towering frame adorned with the elaborate ceremonial armor of the Zenthari High Command. "Explain why your ship remains planet-bound after 3 days. And why," his gaze fell on Jake with obvious distaste, "you have allowed a primitive local to contaminate our sacred vessel." Jake, standing beside his new alien friends, felt the familiar sting of being underestimated. But this time, he had allies. Quillek stepped forward boldly, his young voice carrying surprising authority. "Admiral, Jake Morrison is not a contamination. He is a healer. He repaired our ship when our own diagnostics failed and saved our bio-neural network from catastrophic collapse." "Impossible," declared Chief Engineer Zythak, an ancient Zenthari whose neural implants covered half his skull. "No primitive species could comprehend biomechanical systems. Your ship must have self-repaired coincidentally." Commander Nexus's jaw tightened. "Admiral, with respect, Jake Morrison's abilities are genuine. He has demonstrated understanding of our technology that surpasses even our trained specialists." Admiral Korath's mandibles clicked in irritation. "Commander, it appears your judgment has been compromised by extended contact with these primitives. Report to medical for psychological evaluation. We will tow your vessel back to the fleet immediately." The challenge is the Zenthari rescue teams. Prepared to board Commander Nexus's ship, their own systems began failing. One by one, the massive fleet vessels started showing critical errors in their bio-neural networks. The same harmonic resonance problems that had plagued the exploration ship were now spreading to the entire fleet. "Admiral," Communications Officer Vextar rushed to Korath's side, his face pale with panic. "All ships reporting cascade failures in their bio-neural systems. The effect is spreading exponentially across the fleet network." Jake watched the chaos unfold with growing concern. The Zenthari's interconnected ship systems, their greatest technological achievement, had become their greatest vulnerability. Like a computer virus jumping between networked machines, the harmonic imbalance was infecting every vessel in the fleet. "How many ships?" Admiral Korath demanded. 47 vessels and counting, sir. If we cannot stop this cascade, we will lose the entire fleet within 6 hours." The Admiral's composure cracked for the first time. "Implement emergency quarantine protocols. Sever all intership connections immediately." "Already attempted, sir. The bio-neural networks are rejecting the disconnection commands. The ships are acting as if quarantine would be fatal." Jake stepped forward, ignoring the hostile glares from the Admiral's entourage. "They're right to resist. Cutting them off suddenly would be like severing nerve connections in a living brain. You'd cause permanent damage." "Silence," Admiral Korath roared. "Your primitive meddling has caused this crisis. Our ships were perfectly functional before your contamination spread through our networks." "Admiral," Commander Nexus interjected, "Jake Morrison didn't cause this problem. Our ship's efficiency improvements have revealed a fundamental flaw in our bio-neural architecture. The cascade effect was always possible. We simply never triggered it before. The diagnosis Jake studied the holographic displays showing the A fleet's deteriorating condition. Each ship appeared as a pulsing node in a vast network, with red warning indicators spreading like wildfire between them. But there was a pattern to the chaos that the Zenthari computers were missing. Your ships aren't just randomly failing, Jake observed. Look at the propagation pattern. It's following the command hierarchy. The flagship is acting like a diseased heart, pumping corrupted signals through the entire fleet. Chief Engineer Zythak scoffed. Preposterous. The infinite majesty shows optimal function in all systems. No, he's right, Thylak said, studying her own readings. The flagship's bio-neural signature is subtly different from baseline. It's so minor our instruments classify it as normal variation, but living systems are sensitive to subtle changes, Jake finished for her. One ship's improvement becomes another ship's poison when they're all connected. Admiral Korath's face darkened. Even if your assessment is correct, human, our finest engineers cannot solve this problem. What makes you think you're primitive? Methods could succeed where Zenthari science fails? Jake looked around at the assembled aliens, seeing fear beneath their proud facades. These beings had traveled the stars for millennia, built living ships of impossible beauty, and conquered the mysteries of biomechanical fusion. But they had become so dependent on their advanced systems that they'd forgotten how to heal when those systems turned against them. Because sometimes, Jake said quietly, the most advanced solution is also the most fragile. You've built a perfect system that can't handle imperfection. But life isn't perfect. Life is messy, adaptable, and resilient. You need someone who understands mess. The healing what followed was the most complex repair job of Jake's life. Working with Quilex, Thylix, and a reluctant team of Zenthari engineers, he developed a radical treatment plan. Instead of trying to fix each ship individually, they would treat the entire fleet as a single organism suffering from an autoimmune disorder. Jake established himself in the flagship's bio-neural core, AI, vast chamber filled with pulsing crystal matrices that hummed with the collective consciousness of 47 ships. The scale was overwhelming, like trying to perform surgery on a living galaxy. The pattern is everywhere, Jake murmured, his hands pressed against the central neural node. Each ship is trying to match the others, but they're all slightly out of phase. It's like a choir where everyone is singing the same song in different keys. Can you harmonize them? Quilex asked anxiously. Not by forcing them into the same frequency, Jake replied. That's what your computers are trying to do, and it's making the problem worse. We need to let each ship find its own natural rhythm, then teach them how to sing together without losing their individual voices. For the next 4 hours, Jake worked his way through the flagship's bio-neural network, not repairing or replacing anything, but adjusting and fine-tuning the connections. Between systems, he treated each neural cluster like a musical instrument, helping it find its proper pitch within the larger symphony. The work was exhausting, requiring a level of empathy and intuition that Jake had never pushed to such limits. He had to feel, not just the physical systems, but the emotional resonance of living ships that had developed their own personalities over centuries of service. This one is proud, he said, working on a particularly stubborn neural cluster. It doesn't want to change because it thinks its current state is perfect. How can you tell? Zythak asked, despite himself drawn into fascination with Jake's methods. Same way you can tell when someone's angry or sad, Jake replied. Living things express emotion through their entire being. This ship's been the flagship for decades. It's used to being the standard that others follow, not the patient that needs healing. Gradually, patiently, Jake convinced the flagship's bio-neural network to accept a more flexible configuration. Instead of demanding perfection from every connected ship, it learned to accommodate variation, to find harmony in diversity rather than uniformity. The resolution A's, the flagship's systems settled into their new patterns. The change rippled throughout the fleet. One by one, the red warning indicators turned green as ships found their individual rhythms while remaining connected to the greater whole. Admiral Korath watched in stunned silence as his fleet transformed from a rigid hierarchy into a flexible network. Ship efficiency didn't just return to normal. It improved across the board as vessels began sharing resources and capabilities in ways the original designers had never imagined. Impossible, Zythak whispered. Our fleet is now operating at 130% of design capacity. How did a primitive tool user accomplish what our greatest engineers could not? Jake slumped against the bio-neural core, exhausted, but satisfied. Because I didn't try to impose a solution. I listened to what the ships needed and helped them find their own way to work together. Commander Nexus placed a hand on Jake's shoulder. You have not just saved our fleet, my friend. You have taught us something profound about the nature of life and technology. Admiral Korath approached slowly, his ceremonial armor seeming less imposing than before. Human Jake Morrison, he said formally, I owe you an apology, and our civilization owes you a debt that cannot be repaid. I don't need repayment, Jake replied tiredly. Just, maybe next time you meet a species that does things differently, don't assume they're primitive. Different doesn't mean inferior. The new understanding as the Zenthari fleet prepared to depart, leaving Earth's skies but carrying something far more valuable than they had brought. The relationship between the species had fundamentally changed. The aliens no longer saw humans as primitive beings stumbling through the universe with crude tools and simple minds. They saw partners, beings whose intuitive understanding of life and adaptation could complement their own technological mastery. The universe was vast and full of challenges that would require not just advanced science, but wisdom, empathy, and the kind of hands-on understanding that came from getting your hands dirty. Will you come with us? Quilex asked hopefully as they prepared to leave. There are other worlds, other species, other challenges that could benefit from your gifts. Jake looked out at the stars, tempted by the offer of adventure beyond his wildest dreams. But then he glanced back at his garage, at the familiar tools and the simple life he'd built. Not yet, he said with a smile. I've got a good thing going here, but keep in touch. If you ever need someone to remind you that the best solutions are usually the simplest ones, you know where to find me. As the Zenthari fleet disappeared into hyperspace, Jake returned to his garage and the broken-down pickup truck waiting on his lift. The universe was vast and full of wonders, but sometimes the most profound discoveries happened right in your own backyard. The grease under his fingernails and the oil stains on his coveralls weren't signs of primitive technology. They were badges of honor, proof that the most advanced civilization still needed the human touch to truly thrive. And in the vast network of the Zenthari fleet, now singing in perfect harmony across the galaxy, Jake Morrison's simple wisdom continued to spread, teaching an entire civilization that sometimes the most sophisticated solution was knowing when to trust your hands over your computers.